This is another great one. Someone told me once, skateboarding is like a diamond, right? It's got all of these little fractured elements to it. It's crystallized. There's so much to it that is complex and it's dense. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So I am 46 years old now, and I started skateboarding when I was 11. So I've been skateboarding for 35 years. I had a couple of slow years, but pretty much that's it. I've been a skateboarder. I've at least regarded myself as a skateboarder in terms of outlook and identity for 35 years. So it's probably the longest relationship that I've got beyond like my parents and my sibling. Being of this age and seeing skateboarding change over the last 35 years, what it was like skateboarding in the 1980s, the late 80s when I began, was so different. First of all, if you were a skateboarder back then, you kind of thought what you do was cool, right? You thought this activity is cool, it's enjoyable. You were also very keenly aware that everyone else thought it was stupid, right? Everyone else thought that you were a freak if you were a skateboarder. And particularly, you know, I grew up in this part of the world. It's kind of a quiet, rural part of the world. And I can remember skateboarding down the street. People would push you off your skateboard and people would put their foot underneath your board. And yeah, I've been pushed and knocked off my skateboard quite a lot of times. And like people, they were like, grow out of it. You're too old to be doing this. Even when you're like 15 years of age, people like say, oh, it's childish. And so that's very different. When you look at things today, people think that you're amazing if you skateboard. Oh, that's such a good thing to do. It takes such hard effort. You know, you're really committed. It's like, it's completely changed. But yeah, the idea that skateboarding is some way a criminal activity or rebellious, I think I'm a pretty good boy, to be fair. I'm not a bad, rebellious rebel. But at the same time, skateboarding is only rebellious because it's thinking differently. It's freedom, right? You don't have a set program to follow. You do it your own way. The thing that's really interesting about the boom in skateboarding surrounding COVID, right? That was meant to be a big year. 2021 was meant to be a big year for skateboarding because it was in the Olympics, all this kind of stuff was happening at the same time. And yet skateboarding boomed because of something completely different. It boomed because of this virus. And it's not anecdotal, it's true. Certainly in the skateboard media, there was a lot of talk about how many people were picking up skateboards. A lot of people were choosing to try skateboarding, partly because they were stuck at home, because they couldn't do team sports, but also because they figured if they didn't have to go into the office, they could actually get injured, right? If they twisted an ankle or sprained their wrist or something like that, it wasn't going to affect them too much because they could just hang out at home. So people were trying that as well. And the big thing is that if you wanted to buy a skateboard during COVID, there was suddenly this drought in product. You go to the local skate shop, it was hard to get certain things. It was hard to get new boards, hard to get wheels, partly because the supply chain had slowed up coming from China. So many of the boards are pressed and made in China now. The whole skateboard industry kind of had this boom, but at the same time there was a lack of supply to kind of give to everyone. So the relationship between skateboarding and rules is a complex one. Fundamentally, if you think about what it's like when you skateboard, for those people that have never stood on a skateboard, one of the first things you'll experience when you stand on a skateboard is this rush of adrenaline and fear that this piece of wood with wheels is difficult to control. As soon as you recognize that difficulty in control, you also recognize this unlimited kind of potential. The board can go all sorts of places. It can go all sorts of speeds. It can bounce, it can flip over. There's a potential for it to be very dangerous, very unpredictable. And that's not what rules are, right? Rules are about predictability. Rules are about keeping people contained, things being controllable, quantifiable. You think about what skateboarding is. You don't have a goal. You don't have a limited period of time. You don't have really a set space where you skateboard. Even though skate parks are very popular, even a skate park, right? You say, you've got to skate here. Well, what do you do here? There isn't necessarily one sort of activity you're meant to do here, like score a goal. So it doesn't have rules. It's simply the act of skateboarding doesn't have rules. And by that association, skateboarders tend to be very suspicious and skeptical of rules. They tend to not like them because those rules and how they are imposed on skateboarders are often quite irritating. Say, for example, don't skate here. Well, why not, right? It's concrete, it's the city center, no one's here, let me skate here. It's a perfect place for skateboarding, and yet we're told there's only some places you can skate, right? That annoys skateboarders. The other thing that annoys skateboarders is trying to say that someone is better than someone else. And when you say, hey, that skateboarder is better than that one, you say, well, why? You know, it's like one thing that's really difficult is to say that there is the best skateboarder in the world. Well, how are you going to measure that? You're going to measure that because they can do an ollie better? What happens if the ollie looks more stylish? What happens if the way their body moves is more elegant and pleasing to the eye? Skateboarders have such a big register of what they think is important that giving it a rule, trying to score one person against another, is largely kind of a waste of time, right? You can do it, but then you dismiss it. You appreciate the style, the effort above the score, and that's what sports is so often about, is scoring points, getting the goal. So when you translate skateboarding into the Olympics, for a lot of skateboarders, it's a mismatch. It's an imperfect fit. Skateboarders recognize that what they do is more diverse than simply a competition or a Nike endorsement or a Red Bull cap. It's like there's more to it. And if you can go outside, throw your board down on the floor and skateboard up and down your driveway, you're a skateboarder. You don't need to be Nigel Houston. You don't need to have that endorsement to enjoy the purity of skateboarding.
For me, skateboarding is about progressing and documenting that progression and kind of expressing yourself through the art of skateboarding, putting lines together of what tricks you can do and getting better at that trick you've just learned. But for some other people, it's you've got all these tricks down, the next step is competitions. Earn money from competitions so you can make a living off just skateboarding. And it's just what you make of it, really. It's nice to see it being recognised as like a safer sport rather than, oh, it's just a bunch of teenagers in a field rolling around on boards with wheels. Like, some people do need those rules to be like, okay, this is what I can do, rather than just being let free and like getting confused and overwhelmed about what you can and can't do. I'm pretty happy about it. I know a few people aren't, because they don't like the fact that it's got so mainstream and that you've got companies profiting off it. At the same time, I kind of got to realise that it is good for skateboarding in general, because you have got a load of skate parks built up from the fact that skateboarding's become more popular. Like, for example, Nottingham, they have Skateboard GB is based there, which wouldn't be a thing without the Olympics, really. It's good in the fact that people think it's good because it brings that money into the culture, but also a lot of people think it's bad because of that. Make it feel like cool and anyone can skate when really they have no intent to skate, they just carry around a skateboard. It's good to have that like pop culture, so you can get more people to understand that skateboarding is not just a sport for people who don't really have a care in the world. It's a sport for everyone rather than just that certain person. But it's also annoying because those companies like HSBC and like Virgin Media don't have any intent to support the skateboarding community by marketing and profiteering from the culture, because what they're doing is they're taking the culture and they're putting it into pop culture and not really helping the skate community benefit from something they're marketing from. But in a way, it has been the Olympics and making it more popular, has got a lot more places, new skate parks, so it's become more acceptable. Therefore, building a skate park, a facility where people feel safe to skate, is no longer as frowned upon as it was before the Olympics, because you have that money coming in and you have that ability to be like, look, it's not that bad. You have 13-year-olds doing it who won bronze for Great Britain and all of that.
It was only obviously just recognised as like an Olympic sport, and you're seeing like these like 13-year-olds like doing these crazy stunts, like huge rails, mega tricks, and I think that's inspired a lot of people to get into the sport. I mean, that was probably not the main reason I got into it, but I can definitely see why it becoming an Olympic, like recognised as an Olympic sport, would get people into it. I've always been intrigued by it. I've always looked at it and thought that's a bit of me. And where we are now, there's a big like skate culture around here, and obviously being here for 3 years, I've always walked past the cathedral and seen what's going on, and I always look past and think, I wish that was me. You can tell they're pros, like they know what they're doing. They're doing some crazy things off like handrails and stairs and stuff. It can be quite intimidating. That's why I mainly skate on my own. I don't want to like interfere. To really get good like these guys, you've got to. I feel like you've got to spend like a lot of commitment and a lot of hours in it. For me, it's more just the fun of it. Just you know, you've had dinner, it's sunny outside, weather's good, your friends just text you, fancy going for a little skate, yeah, go, let's go. It's more that freedom, that independence of just being able to leave the house with your board and nothing but your headphones and a phone and just going. That's what I like about it.
People have spent a long time trying to define skateboarding. I've got colleagues who've written academic papers on how do you define skateboarding. For some people, it's a sport. Obviously, it's a sport. It's in the Olympics, right? But for me, it's not a sport. I mean, I've been skateboarding for 35 years. I've never entered a competition in my life. Never. It holds no interest for me because I don't skateboard to compete. I don't do that. So for me, it's an art. I got another friend that calls it a philosophy. I got other friends that just refer to it as a culture, right? There isn't a set uniform way to express it. And that's what makes it so important. Because if someone says this is a sport and someone says this is a philosophy, this is performance art, then great. Because that means this thing is really powerful. It's like really, really potent that it can be so many things. Actually, this is another great one. Someone told me once, skateboarding is like a diamond, right? It's got all of these little fractured elements to it. It's crystallized. There's so much to it that is complex and it's dense. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. It's remarkable because it's unlike anything else. It's like a lot of things. Don't get me wrong here. It's like a lot of things. It's like surfing, right? It's like other sports. It's like other things that are in the Olympics. It's like BMX. It's also like rock climbing. It's an individual sport. But think about skateboarding. Think about the fact that when you buy a skateboard, it's got a crazy piece of art on it, right? It's got like a dragon eating some kind of meteorite, or it's got some skull and crossbone, or just like a goofy political comment. I mean, there were all sorts of boards that were released during the 2016 election that were anti-Trump, for example, and there's some really satirical art on skateboards. How often do you see that type of art reproduced on a surfboard, which is closer to home? Not very often. They have decorative design, but not maybe the artistic statements that skateboards have. You certainly don't find anything like that on a rugby ball, or a football, or a tennis racket. So just simply looking at the artifact of a skateboard and the fact that so much effort goes into decorating them with these evocative, satirical images, and what's the first thing a skateboarder does? They put their trucks and wheels on the board, they go and skate, and the skate park can scratch it up. Right? There's this kind of amazing embrace of nihilism, right? You embrace the art of skateboarding, you embrace the style, but at the same time, you embrace the fact that it's not permanent, right? You can destroy it. And one of the craziest things in the world is these beautiful boards that are released. Some people put them up on the wall. Why not? They look great, put them up on the wall. But at the end of the day, every skateboard is meant to be destroyed. It's meant to be scratched. Collecting them, it's almost an affront to the culture, right? And don't get me wrong, I've got skateboards hanging up on my wall. So I understand what I'm saying, and I contradict it at the same time. But in my heart, I know, like, if it came to the crunch, I would skate one of those boards and scratch them up. But that's the whole point, right? You kind of just take one facet of skateboarding and you think of the art, think of how it relates to sport, think of how it relates to rules. And it goes on as a kind of like a big connection there.